The first proof that the universe had misjudged humanity arrived not as a weapon nor as a declaration, but as a cargo manifest written in 3 incompatible mathematical languages and stamped with a seal that none of the dock clerks on Kestrel Station could read. The station hung above a pale gas giant whose storms folded in on themselves like slow, luminous thoughts, and for 3 centuries it had been a place where nothing truly surprising happened. Freight moved, crews rotated, laws bent without breaking. The manifest, however, refused to bend at all. It described materials that could not exist according to accepted interstellar engineering, yet the scanners swore the cargo bay was full of exactly what the document claimed. The dock clerks argued, escalated the matter, and eventually passed it upward to someone whose job it was to make sense of impossible things. Her name was Seiran Vetch, and she had learned long ago that the universe delighted in humiliating anyone who assumed it followed rules out of courtesy. She was not young, but neither was she old in the way most species measured age. Humanity measured endurance instead. Seiran had endured famines, migrations, the slow political grinding that came after first contact, and the quieter humiliation of discovering that most older civilizations thought humans were charming but inconsequential. When the message reached her terminal, she did not react with awe or fear. She reacted with annoyance, which was the proper response to an unscheduled complication. The cargo bay doors were open when she arrived, revealing a lattice of containers whose surfaces seemed to drink in light. They were not black, not quite. They were textured in a way that made the eye slide, as though every attempt to focus found a slightly different surface. Around them stood representatives from 4 species, each maintaining a careful distance. The carrot delegate kept its frilled crest folded tight, a sign of restrained agitation. The Aurelian logistics overseer tapped jointed fingers against a slate, calculating and recalculating probabilities that refused to settle. A single Varn sentinel watched without moving, its reflective carapace mirroring the cargo in distorted fragments. Seiran walked between them without ceremony, her boots ringing against the deck. She placed her palm against the nearest container. It felt warm, almost alive, but not in any way she could name. The material responded by shifting its surface, forming a shallow impression of her hand, then smoothing itself again. A murmur passed through the onlookers. "Origin," Seiran said, not as a question. The Aurelian cleared its throat, a sound like dry leaves. Filed as human manufactured. Point of origin listed as sole peripheral yards, outer belt. Authorization codes are valid. Historical probability of forgery is negligible. The carrot hissed softly. "Your species does not possess the capability to fabricate adaptive matter at this scale. We have catalogued your industry. You are inventive, yes, but slow. Careful, this is not your style." Seiran smiled thinly. "We are inventive, slow, and careful until we are not." She signaled for the containers to be opened. Protocol demanded a committee review, but protocol had not prepared for a manifest that refused to obey arithmetic. When the seals parted, the interior revealed structures that resembled frameworks rather than finished machines. They were skeletal, open, waiting. Threads of energy crawled along their lengths, not constrained by conduits, but guided by shapes that implied intention rather than design. Anyone else might have called them incomplete. Seiran recognized them as tools awaiting hands. The first message arrived before the bay could be sealed again. It did not use standard channels. It did not announce itself. It simply appeared on every display within the station, overriding language preferences, compression standards, and security firewalls with equal indifference. The text was plain. "We apologize for the disruption. We are aware this delivery is unexpected. It is necessary. Please listen." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some species panicked, others prepared countermeasures, still others attempted to trace the signal and failed. Seiran did none of these things. She read the message twice, then waited for the next line. It came after a pause that felt deliberate. For generations, you have measured humanity as a minor variable. This assessment was reasonable. It is no longer accurate. The carrot delegate unfurled its crest in a display of anger. This is a provocation. Who speaks for your kind? Seiran answered before the system could. Someone who understands timing. As if in response, the message continued. We have been quiet because we were learning. We have been small because we were building. We have been patient because we had to be. The structures you see are not weapons. They are not defenses. They are interfaces. The word hung in the air like a challenge. The Aurelian tilted its head. Interfaces between what? Seiran felt a flicker of something that might have been pride, quickly smothered by caution. Between us and problems we have not solved yet. The message expanded, diagrams unfolding across the displays. They showed stars collapsing into unnatural configurations, regions of spacetime twisted by forces no known civilization claimed to wield, trade routes severed, habitats emptied, species listed with status markers that translated poorly but whose meaning was unmistakable. Gone, consumed, rewritten. This is not a human crisis, the message said. It is not even a galactic one. It is older than our records and wider than your maps. You have encountered its edges and named them anomalies. You have lost people to it and called those losses unfortunate. You have not faced it directly because until now no one could. The Vaan's sentinel shifted, the first movement it had made since Seiran arrived. You claim capability where elder collectives have failed. The reply was immediate. Yes, there was no embellishment, no justification, just certainty. Seiran recognized that tone. She had heard it from engineers who knew a bridge would hold because they had walked every rivet. She had heard it from colonists planting the first crops on poisoned soil because starvation was not an option. It was not arrogance. It was resolve forged by necessity. How? Seiran asked softly. The answer did not come in words at first. One of the frameworks in the open container shifted, responding to her voice. It unfolded, segments sliding into alignment with a grace that defied inertia. Energy patterns stabilized, forming a field that projected a three-dimensional representation of a human hand, not idealized, scarred, calloused, real. We stopped asking what the universe allowed, the message said. We started asking what it required. When the answers were insufficient, we learned to supply our own. Images followed, not as propaganda, but as documentation. Early human experiments that failed catastrophically. Cities evacuated, worlds abandoned, projects buried because they were too dangerous to continue. Not erased, just paused. Generations later, descendants returned to those buried ideas with better tools and steadier hands. Where other species optimized for elegance, humanity optimized for resilience. Where others sought equilibrium, humanity accepted imbalance and learned to surf it. The carrot delegate made a sound that translated poorly, somewhere between disbelief and reluctant admiration. You broke fundamental constraints. We bent them, Seiran murmured, more to herself than to anyone else, over and over until they learned our shape. The message shifted again, focusing now on the present. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a trajectory. A region of space 3 jumps from Kestrel Station had begun to exhibit the same distortions shown earlier, but at an accelerating rate. Evacuation was underway, but projections showed it would not be enough. Whatever consumed those systems did not respect mass or energy as separate concepts. It rewrote outcomes. We cannot fight this alone, the message said, not because we lack strength, but because this is not a problem strength solves by itself. These interfaces allow cognition to engage directly with unstable physical laws. They require adaptability. They require hands that can fail, learn, and try again without breaking. The implication was clear, and it unsettled everyone present. Humanity was not offering salvation. It was offering work. Seiran straightened. You are asking us to trust you with our people. The pause before the reply was longer this time. Yes. And we are offering you the means to verify every claim we make. We will not ask for faith, only participation. The Aurelian ran probability models at a speed that would have melted lesser processors. Statistical analysis indicates cooperation increases survival likelihood by an order of magnitude. Refusal results in near certainty of loss within 5 standard cycles. The Varn clicked softly. Elder collectives will not accept this without proof. They will accept extinction less, Seiran said. She turned her attention fully to the message. Who leads this effort? There was a subtle shift in the language, a move from collective to personal that Seiran almost missed. No one leads it, the message said. We coordinate, we argue, we make mistakes. The ones you will meet are not heroes. They are workers, builders, people who got tired of being told to stay in their lane when the road was collapsing. A memory surfaced unbidden of Seiran's grandmother telling stories about the early days after first contact, when humans were politely excluded from major decisions because they lacked the wisdom of age. They had been told to watch and learn. They had done so, but not in the way anyone expected. The frameworks in the cargo bay continued to unfold, responding now to the presence of the others. Each species triggered different configurations, tailored not to physiology alone, but to cognitive patterns. The Carrots interface emphasized parallel perception. The Aurelians highlighted probabilistic manipulation. The Varns resonated with structural harmonics. Humanity had not built a single solution, it had built a language. This will change everything, the Carrot delegate said quietly. Seiran nodded. Everything changes eventually. The question is whether we change with it or get rewritten. The message delivered its final line with a simplicity that felt almost gentle. We are ready to begin, if you are. Around the cargo bay, alarms continued to ring, messages continued to arrive, politics continued to grind. But for a moment, in that shared space of unfolding possibility, the universe seemed to lean closer, curious despite itself. Humanity, once measured and found wanting, had finished its quiet preparation. It had not come to demand a throne or declare dominion over the stars. It had come with unbroken hands and an invitation to build something that could survive what was coming. The first joint deployment took place in a system whose name translated roughly to Fractuelite hesitates, a poetic indulgence from an extinct culture that had charted the region long before faster-than-light travel became commonplace. Humanity renamed it on their internal maps with a string of coordinates and hazard annotations, but they did not object to the older name being used in council briefings. Names, they had learned, were often the only inheritance left to the dead. Seiran arrived aboard a human vessel that did not resemble any military craft she had studied. It was wide rather than long, layered rather than sleek, its hull composed of interlocking plates that could shear, rotate, or detach entirely if required. The ship's profile changed subtly as it maneuvered, responding to gravitational gradients like a swimmer adjusting posture in a current. No single surface was ornamental. Every protrusion had a function, and several functions had no names yet. Inside, the corridors were broader than necessary, cluttered with tools, modular consoles, and handholds positioned for bodies that might not share human proportions. The air carried a faint metallic tang mixed with something organic, like soil after rain. Seiran passed crews of mixed species working side by side, not segregated by origin, but by task. There were arguments, raised voices, gestures that in other contexts might have been interpreted as threats. No one intervened. Disagreement, it seemed, was part of the process. She was led to a central operations chamber that lacked the hierarchical layout she expected. There was no raised platform, no obvious command throne. Instead, the room was dominated by a suspended lattice similar to the frameworks from the cargo bay, now expanded and active. It pulsed with slow rhythms, responding to the presence of those nearby. Data flowed across its surfaces not as static readouts, but as evolving patterns that required interpretation rather than passive consumption. A human approached her, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair pulled back in a practical tie. Their face bore the marks of old injuries poorly healed, a reminder that human medicine, while advanced, still left traces. They did not offer a title. "I am Kira Irons," they said. "I coordinate this cluster." Saoirun inclined her head. "Saoirun Vetch, you already know that." Kira smiled faintly. "Yes. You have a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions." "Someone has to," Saoirun replied. "You said you coordinate. Who decides?" Kira gestured toward the lattice, where several nodes brightened in response. "That does. We feed it constraints, priorities, ethical limits. It models outcomes faster than we can argue. When it suggests something none of us like, we argue anyway. Sometimes it wins." "You built a machine to tell you when you are wrong," Saoirun said. "We built a mirror," Kira corrected. "One that does not care about our pride." The system they had come to confront lay ahead, visible now through the forward observation field. Space itself appeared bruised, light-bending in ways that made depth perception unreliable. Stars near the distortion stretched into elongated smears, their spectra bleeding into one another. Sensors struggled to produce coherent readings, reporting contradictory measurements simultaneously. "This is the nearest stable boundary," Kira said. "Beyond it, causality frays. Objects do not just move unpredictably, they arrive before they leave." Saoirun felt a chill despite the controlled temperature. "You intend to enter?" "We already have," Kira said, indicating a cluster of icons within the lattice. "Unmanned probes, manned craft. We lost some. We learned from all of them." Saoirun focused on one icon marked with a human symbol. Its trajectory looped back on itself in a way that made her eyes ache. "That vessel appears to be inside itself." "Yes," Kira said calmly. "It is uncomfortable. The crew reports headaches and temporal disorientation. They volunteered." "You accept losses at this stage," Saoirun said. It was not an accusation. "We accept that avoiding loss entirely guarantees greater loss later," Kira replied. "We do not spend lives casually, but we do not pretend we can save everyone by refusing to risk anyone." The lattice shifted, highlighting a region where the distortion intensified. Data overlays suggested that something within was actively expanding the anomaly, feeding on the interactions of matter and energy that approached it. It was not intelligent in any recognizable sense, but it was not mindless either. It responded to interference with adaptation. "Our current hypothesis," Kira said, "is that this phenomenon originated as a self-correcting cosmological process in a prior universe iteration, something designed to prune unstable regions. When conditions changed, it did not stop. It learned to persist." Saoirun absorbed this. "You are fighting a maintenance function that outlived its context." "Yes," Kira said. "We are very familiar with that problem." The interfaces came online as they prepared to advance. Saoirun watched as individuals connected, not through invasive implants, but through contact points that responded to touch, proximity, even intention. The systems read neural patterns, emotional states, stress responses, and fed that information back into the lattice, which adjusted parameters accordingly. This was not control in the traditional sense. It was collaboration. A carrot specialist linked in, its frilled crest illuminated by shifting light. An Aurelian probability analyst followed, mandibles clicking as data streams flooded its perception. A Van structural theorist anchored the system's understanding of material coherence. Humanity did not dominate the process, it orchestrated it. Saoirun hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The interface adapted to her presence, forming a surface that met her palm with gentle resistance. When she made contact, the sensation was overwhelming but not painful. She felt not just data, but context, the weight of decisions made and deferred, the echoes of failures that still shaped current caution, the stubborn optimism that refused to be extinguished. She gasped, steadying herself. "You are sharing far more than necessary." Kira watched her closely. "Trust is inefficient if rationed too tightly." Within the anomaly, the first active maneuver began. Rather than attempting to contain or destroy the distortion, the joint team introduced controlled irregularities, small disruptions designed to confuse the adaptive process. Humanity's contribution was not raw power, but unpredictability. They introduced variables that did not optimize for any single outcome, forcing the phenomenon to spread its adaptations thin. It responded, of course. Tendrils of warped space lashed outward, consuming a probe, rewriting its trajectory into a Möbius loop that collapsed into a point. The lattice registered the loss, redistributed tasks, adjusted parameters. No panic rippled through the connected minds. Loss was acknowledged, incorporated, and moved past. Saoirun felt her own instincts strain against the process. Her training emphasized stability, the preservation of known quantities. Here, instability was a tool. Humans did not seek equilibrium. They sought survivable motion. Hours stretched into something less defined. Time within the anomaly did not behave consistently, and the lattice compensated by anchoring participants to shared reference points. Saoirun found herself thinking of her childhood on a marginal world where seasons were unpredictable, where crops failed as often as they succeeded. Humans had colonized such worlds not because they were ideal, but because they taught lessons useful elsewhere. A breakthrough came not with an explosion or dramatic reversal, but with a subtle shift in the distortion's behavior. It began to hesitate. Regions that had expanded aggressively now recoiled from introduced irregularities, as though encountering something it could not easily assimilate. It is encountering patterns that do not converge, the Aurelian analyst reported. Adaptive cycle is destabilizing. Kira nodded. Good. Now we offer it an alternative. What they offered was astonishing in its audacity. Instead of pushing the anomaly away, they reshaped the surrounding space to create channels, paths of least resistance that guided the distortion's expansion into controlled configurations. They did not cage it. They redirected it, turning its own tendency to grow into a means of self-limitation. Saoirun felt a surge of admiration she did not try to suppress. "You are not defeating it," she said. "You are giving it somewhere to go." "Yes," Kira said, "somewhere that does not intersect with inhabited space, somewhere it can persist without consuming us." The process was delicate. One miscalculation could have amplified the anomaly beyond their ability to respond. Several times, Saoirun felt the lattice strain, ethical constraints flashing as proposed actions brushed against unacceptable risk thresholds. Each time, adjustments were made, not by decree, but by consensus forged at the speed of shared cognition. When the distortion finally stabilized into a slow, predictable expansion along the engineered channels, the chamber erupted not in cheers, but in exhausted laughter, relieved exhalations, quiet embraces between beings who might never have interacted otherwise. Humanity had not delivered a miracle. It had delivered a method. Saoirun disengaged from the interface, her limbs trembling. Kira offered her a steadying hand, which she accepted without hesitation. "This is only one system," Saoirun said. "There will be others, larger, worse." Kira nodded. "We know. That is why we did not wait to be asked." Saoirun looked around at the mixed crew, the lattice still humming softly as it processed post-action analysis. "The elder collectives will demand oversight, restrictions. They will want to slow this down. They always do," Kira said. "We will argue, we will compromise where we can. Where we cannot, we will proceed anyway." Saoirun met their gaze. "You risk political isolation." Kira smiled, weary but unbowed. "We have been isolated before. It gave us time to prepare." As the ship turned away from Fractuelite hesitates, leaving behind a universe slightly less hostile than before, Saoirun understood what truly set humanity apart. It was not their technology, though that was formidable. It was not their numbers, nor their ambition. It was their refusal to accept that the shape of reality was fixed simply because it was old. They did not worship the universe. They worked with it, argued with it, scarred it and healed it in equal measure. And when faced with something that could not be destroyed, they asked not how to kill it, but how to live alongside it without being consumed. Saoirun began drafting her report to the Interstellar Council, before the ship had even completed its jump. She did not soften her language. She did not exaggerate. She simply described what she had seen and concluded with an assessment that would unsettle centuries of comfortable hierarchy. Humanity was no longer a minor variable. It was a force that reshaped problems rather than submitting to them. Those who refused to adapt alongside it would not be conquered. They would simply be left behind, clinging to rules that no longer applied, as the universe moved on with unbroken hands, guiding its most dangerous work. The Interstellar Council Chamber had been designed to intimidate. Its architects, drawn from a dozen elder species, had believed that scale conveyed authority, that vast distances between speaker and listener reinforced hierarchy. The chamber was a hollowed sphere large enough to contain a small city, with tiers of platforms suspended at varying altitudes, each calibrated to the preferred gravity and atmospheric composition of its occupants. At the center hung a projection of the known galaxy, rotating slowly, its colors coded to trade density, population, and political influence. Humanity's region was a modest cluster on the periphery, unremarkable in brightness, easy to overlook. Seiran stood on her assigned platform, feeling very small, and did not adjust her posture to compensate. She had learned that false confidence was more insulting than honest resolve. Around her, representatives murmured, exchanged pheromonal signals, flicked bioluminescent patterns, or simply watched in silence. The report she had submitted had circulated for less than a standard cycle, but already it had ignited debates across diplomatic channels. Now, the council demanded explanation. "Your testimony asserts," said the council moderator, an ancient being whose species had not yet invented spoken language when humanity first learned to shape stone, that a cooperative action led by humans stabilized a Class 7 existential anomaly. Independent verification is limited. Seiran inclined her head. Independent verification is forthcoming. The anomaly's behavior has altered in ways consistent with our projections. It no longer expands unpredictably. Its energy signature is now constrained to engineered channels. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Several delegates adjusted their platforms, increasing distance as though spatial separation might offer safety from implication. The moderator's many eyes narrowed. "You propose that this method be adopted broadly, that humans be granted operational latitude across multiple jurisdictions. I propose that humanity already has operational latitude," Seiran said evenly. "They are acting regardless of council endorsement. The question before us is whether we act with them or react after the fact." A representative of the Thescan continuity emitted a low-frequency vibration, its equivalent of derision. "Your species has always been adaptable, but adaptability without wisdom is volatility. Humans have a documented history of destabilizing environments in pursuit of short-term goals." Seiran did not deny it. "We also have a documented history of stabilizing environments we had no business surviving in. We learned because failure was not theoretical for us, it was personal." The moderator shifted the projection, highlighting data from Fractuelite hesitates. Metrics scrolled, showing reduced variance, increased predictability. The anomaly had not been destroyed, but it had been rendered manageable. "This is not a solution," said a delegate from the Orinth Spiral. "It is a postponement." "Yes," Seiran said, "and postponement is sometimes the difference between extinction and iteration. Humanity understands that better than most. They are not promising an end to this threat. They are offering time." Another voice rose, sharp and crystalline. "And what do they demand in return for this time?" Seiran met the speaker's gaze. "Participation, transparency, the willingness to accept that some of our most cherished constraints are artifacts of fear rather than necessity." The chamber fell into a deeper silence. Fear was not a word elder species liked to examine too closely. Many of their taboos had originated as survival mechanisms long ago, ossified into law through generations of success. To question them was to question the foundations of their dominance. A smaller platform shifted closer, its occupant a young delegate from a recently contacted species. If humanity is correct, the delegate said hesitantly, and this phenomenon is an ancient maintenance process, then attempting to destroy it might exacerbate the instability. Redirecting it could be the only viable option. The Thescan continuity vibrated again, this time with irritation. You are inexperienced. You have not seen civilizations erased by well-intentioned experimentation. Seiran turned toward the Thescan platform. Humans have. We have entire archives dedicated to cataloging our own mistakes. We do not hide them, we teach them. The moderator raised a limb, signaling for order. There is another concern. Humanity's interfaces, as described, integrate cognition directly with physical law manipulation. This represents a profound shift in agency. Who is accountable when such a system fails? Seiran took a breath. This was the heart of it. Those who participate. Humans do not centralize blame. They distribute responsibility along with authority. Every action is logged, every decision traceable. There is no singular leader to scapegoat, no throne to topple. A murmur spread. Distributed responsibility was anathema to cultures built on lineage and command. It threatened not just safety, but identity. The debate stretched on, spiraling through ethical frameworks, historical precedents, projected risks. Seiran answered where she could, deferred where she must, and refused to soften the implications. Humanity's approach would not fit neatly into existing structures. It would strain them, perhaps break some. In the end, the Council did what it always did when confronted with an unavoidable shift. It compromised with itself. A limited authorization was granted. Humanity would be allowed to deploy its methods in designated zones under observation. Data sharing would be mandatory. Oversight committees would be formed, though their authority was deliberately vague. As the chamber emptied, Seiran remained for a moment, gazing at the projection of the galaxy. Humanity's cluster still glowed modestly, but she knew that brightness was a poor measure of influence. Some forces reshaped trajectories without ever shining brightly. Her return to human space was not immediate. She was diverted to a transit hub where reports of a second anomaly had surfaced, this one closer to a densely populated trade corridor. Humanity was already there. The hub was in chaos when she arrived. Ships crowded the docks, evacuation orders overlapping with military alerts. Through it all moved human teams, calm in a way that bordered on unsettling. They did not shout commands. They asked questions, they listened. Seiran found Kira again near a temporary operations node hastily assembled from modular components. The lattice shimmered, smaller than before but no less active. You anticipated resistance, Seiran said, joining them. We anticipated caution, Kira replied. Resistance is just caution that has forgotten how to move. Seiran relayed the Council's decision. Kira listened without visible reaction, though the lattice registered a spike in activity as the information was integrated. They will watch, Seiran concluded. Closely. Good, Kira said. Watching is better than pretending nothing is happening. The anomaly ahead was different. Where the first had been diffuse and sprawling, this one was compact, intense, its distortions sharp enough to slice sensor beams into meaningless fragments. It pulsed with a rhythm that suggested feedback loops spiraling out of control. This one is young, Kira said, or newly activated. It is more aggressive. And closer to people, Seiran added. Yes, Kira said quietly. The deployment was faster this time. Lessons from the first engagement had been codified, interfaces refined. New participants joined, including delegates from species that had not waited for Council approval. Fear, it seemed, was a powerful motivator for innovation. As the operation unfolded, Seiran observed a subtle but significant shift. Humanity no longer framed their actions as instruction. They framed them as invitation. When a carrot specialist proposed an unconventional manipulation of spatial gradients, humans did not overrule it. They tested it in simulation, integrated it when it worked, discarded it when it did not. The anomaly resisted fiercely. Several times, localized reality sheer threatened to cascade into inhabited zones. Each time, the lattice rerouted cognitive load, allowing fresh minds to take over tasks as others reached exhaustion. No one was indispensable. No one was allowed to burn out unnoticed. Seiran felt herself drawn deeper into the process, contributing insights from her own species, long experience with bureaucratic inertia and slow collapse. She suggested using trade corridor traffic patterns as part of the redirection strategy, exploiting the anomaly's tendency to follow established energy flows. It was risky. It worked. When the anomaly was finally guided into a stable configuration far from the corridor, the relief was palpable. Ships resumed their routes. Evacuation orders were rescinded. Lives continued. In the aftermath, as crews debriefed and data flowed outward to the ever-watchful council, Seiran and Kira stood together, watching the lattice dim as systems powered down. "They will not thank you," Seiran said. Kira shrugged. "We did not start this for thanks." "What did you start it for?" Seiran asked. Kira considered. "Because we looked at the universe we were inheriting and realized that reverence was not enough. Someone had to take responsibility for the messes left behind by cosmic history. We were already good at cleaning up after ourselves." Seiran smiled, a small, fierce expression. "You have changed the conversation." "We had to," Kira said. "The old one was going to get everyone killed." As Seiran prepared to move on, to carry these experiences back into the tangled web of interstellar politics, she understood that the most dangerous thing humanity had introduced was not a technology or a tactic. It was an example. They had demonstrated that survival did not require ancient authority, only the willingness to accept responsibility for outcomes and to keep working when the universe refused to cooperate. Others would resist that lesson. Some would try to copy it without understanding the cost, but the measure had been taken. The galaxy had seen what unbroken hands could do when they stopped asking permission from fear and started asking how to build a future that could endure what was already on its way. The third anomaly did not announce itself with distortion or loss. It announced itself with absence. A region of space went quiet in a way that defied sensor logic, not empty, not collapsed, but selectively unresponsive. Ships passing through emerged unchanged in structure, yet altered in subtle, horrifying ways. Crew members reported missing memories that were not random but specific, as if something had reached into their pasts and removed supporting beams. Languages lost nuance. Skills dulled. Entire cultural practices returned from transit flattened, functional but hollow. Human analysts were the first to name it a cognitive erosion field, though they were careful to note that naming it did not mean understanding it. Elder collectives, alarmed in a way they rarely showed, issued immediate travel bans and quarantine orders. Humanity ignored the ban and requested volunteers instead. Seiran arrived at the forward staging area with a sense of unease she had not felt since her earliest diplomatic missions. The staging platform was built around the quiet region like a cautious ring, layered with sensor arrays and escape contingencies. Unlike previous operations, there was an undercurrent of anger among the crews, human and otherwise. This anomaly did not merely threaten lives. It threatened identity. Kira met her at the perimeter, their expression tighter than usual. "This one scares us," they admitted without preamble. Seiran respected the honesty, because it cannot be redirected, because it does not behave like a force, Kira said. It behaves like an edit. The lattice deployed here was larger than any before, reinforced with redundancies that bordered on obsessive. Humanity had learned that when the threat was subtle, over-engineering was not wasteful. It was respectful. Early probe data scrolled across the lattice, showing patterns of degradation that aligned disturbingly well with known human cognitive structures. Memory consolidation pathways, emotional reinforcement loops, meaning itself appeared to be a resource the field consumed or neutralized. "This would cripple us," Seiran said quietly. "We are not a species that survives well without narrative." Kira nodded. "Nor are most, but humans are particularly vulnerable. We build ourselves out of stories. Take enough of those away and you do not kill us. You make us stop caring whether we live." The Council, watching through secure relays, urged delay. They proposed years of study, remote analysis, non-interference. Humanity ran the simulations and found that delay would allow the field to expand into several densely populated systems within decades, not centuries, decades. "So what do you do?" Seiran asked. "When the problem eats the very thing you use to solve problems." Kira placed a hand on the lattice. "You find something it cannot eat." The solution humanity proposed was controversial enough to fracture several oversight committees. They would introduce participants whose cognitive architectures were deliberately incomplete, humans with neurological variations that disrupted traditional memory formation, individuals who experienced identity as fluid rather than fixed, artificial constructs trained not on meaning, but on process. Minds that functioned without relying on cohesive narrative. "We are not immune," Kira explained during the briefing, "but some of us are less appetizing." Seiran felt a surge of protective anger. "You are talking about exposing your own people to a threat that specifically targets what makes them whole." "Yes," Kira said. "And we are talking about doing it with informed consent, medical oversight, and exit protocols. This is not sacrifice, it is specialization." The first team entered the quiet region under intense monitoring. Immediately, standard data feeds degraded, visuals flattened, emotional telemetry blurred, but the specialized participants maintained coherence longer than expected. Where the field sought meaning, it found gaps. Where it attempted to smooth identity, it encountered edges that did not align. Seiran watched, heart pounding, as the lattice adapted to this new form of engagement. Instead of amplifying cognition, it began to compartmentalize it, isolating functions so that erosion could not cascade. Humanity was learning to think in ways that resisted being consumed. The field responded by intensifying. Ships began to lose not just memory, but skill. A human engineer forgot how to read their own language, though they retained motor coordination. A carrot specialist lost the ability to perceive parallel inputs, their mind collapsing into a narrow, panicked channel. Humanity adapted again. They began rotating participants at intervals measured not in time, but in cognitive load. They treated minds like muscles, resting them before failure rather than pushing to collapse. It was messy, inefficient, and brutally human. Seiran found herself drawn into the process despite her initial reluctance. Her species had long practiced mental compartmentalization as a defense against political trauma. She offered techniques refined over centuries of bureaucratic survival. Humanity tested them, modified them, integrated what worked. The breakthrough came when a human participant, one of the neurodivergent volunteers, noticed something others had missed. The field did not erase meaning uniformly. It targeted reinforcement. It weakened the emotional weight that made memories persist. "It is not deleting us," the participant said, their voice steady despite the strain. "It is convincing us that none of this matters." That insight reframed everything. Humanity adjusted their approach, flooding the engagement with raw sensation rather than narrative, physical feedback, pain, pleasure, exertion. Experiences too immediate to be abstracted. The lattice began emphasizing embodiment over cognition, anchoring participants in the present moment. The field recoiled, not dramatically but perceptibly. Regions of quiet fractured into pockets, their influence weakened. "It cannot process immediacy," Kira said, or threading their exhaustion. "It needs reflection to feed." Humanity pressed the advantage carefully. They did not try to destroy the field. They saturated it with stimuli it could not digest, forcing it to disperse to maintain function. Over weeks of grueling effort, the quiet region thinned, its boundaries retreating until it no longer posed an immediate threat. When the operation ended, the cost was evident. Several participants would require long-term care. Some losses were permanent. Humanity recorded every failure with the same meticulous honesty as every success. The Council response was fractured. Some hailed the operation as proof of humanity's indispensable role. Others condemned it as reckless experimentation bordering on self-harm. Seiran delivered her testimony again, voice hoarse but unyielding. "They did not save us by being invulnerable," she said. "They saved us by knowing exactly where they were vulnerable and working anyway." In the aftermath, humanity did something unexpected. They published everything, not just the data, but the doubts, the arguments, the moments where they nearly withdrew and why they did not. They invited critique, replication, improvement. Several elder species were unsettled by this openness. Knowledge to them was leverage. To humanity, it was insulation against repeating mistakes alone. Seiran visited Kira one last time before returning to Council space. They sat in a quiet observation deck, watching stars pass in orderly lines as the ship prepared for transit. "You are changing more than survival strategies," Seiran said. "You are changing how power works." Kira leaned back, eyes closed. "Power that cannot be questioned becomes brittle. We learned that the hard way before we ever left our system." "What happens when others try to use your methods for conquest?" Seiran asked. "They will fail," Kira said simply. "These systems do not work without consent, without shared responsibility. You cannot force someone to build with you and expect the structure to hold." Seiran considered that, then nodded. "You have given the galaxy a tool that requires maturity to use. We hope it grows into it," Kira said. As the ship jumped, carrying Seiran back toward the labyrinth of politics and fear she would have to navigate, she reflected on the pattern emerging. Humanity did not confront the universe by hardening itself against change. It confronted it by becoming more flexible, more honest about its own fractures. Where others sought perfection, humanity sought resilience. Where others feared erosion, humanity learned to shape itself around it, to survive not by remaining unchanged, but by choosing which changes to accept. The universe, ancient and indifferent, continued to present problems no one had asked for. For the first time in a long while, Seiran believed that there might be a species stubborn enough, flawed enough, and willing enough to keep answering anyway, not with reverence or despair, but with work, adaptation, and the quiet confidence of hands that refused to break even when the mind itself was under threat. The fourth crisis did not emerge from deep space or ancient cosmological remnants. It came from within the web of civilization itself, born of success rather than neglect. The trade lattice that bound hundreds of species together had grown dense, efficient, and dangerously interdependent. Energy markets synchronized across light years. Food security algorithms optimized supply chains to the edge of tolerance. Communication protocols compressed nuance for speed. It was elegant. It was brittle. When the collapse began, it cascaded faster than any anomaly humanity had yet faced. Seiran was in Council transit when the first alerts reached her, cascading across diplomatic channels with increasing urgency. Entire systems experienced synchronized shortages despite no physical disruption. Habitats reported power fluctuations tied not to infrastructure failure, but to predictive models correcting for errors that had not yet occurred. The trade lattice was eating itself, feedback loops amplifying microscopic deviations into systemic shock. By the time Seiran reached the nearest coordination hub, humanity had already declared an economic emergency and done something that shocked nearly every observer. They had deliberately severed their own integration from the lattice. Human trade nodes went dark in controlled stages, disconnecting from optimization networks that had taken centuries to refine. Markets destabilized. Human worlds experienced shortages, rationing, unrest, and still they continued. Kira stood at the center of a hastily assembled operations space, surrounded not by physicists or engineers this time, but by economists, sociologists, logistics planners, and historians. The lattice interface hovered above them, its patterns jagged, struggling to reconcile contradictory objectives. "You cut yourself loose," Seiran said as she approached, disbelief threading her voice. "Your systems are suffering." "Yes," Kira said, "which means they are learning." "You could have waited," Seiran pressed, "isolated the fault first, and allowed the cascade to continue elsewhere," Kira replied. "This is not a failure you observe safely, it is one you absorb until it loses momentum." The council was furious. Accusations of sabotage flowed freely. Humanity was blamed for destabilizing markets, for acting unilaterally, for violating trade accords that predated their interstellar presence. Seiran fielded demands for censure, sanctions, even expulsion from shared infrastructure. She listened, then delivered what would become one of the most contentious addresses in council history. "They did not break the lattice," she said. "They revealed its fracture points by refusing to pretend perfection was possible. You built a system that assumes compliance from reality itself. Humanity built one that assumes error. Behind the scenes, the human response unfolded with relentless pragmatism. They reintroduced friction into their economies deliberately, redundant routes, local surpluses, inefficiencies that would have been considered wasteful by any optimization algorithm. They encouraged regional autonomy at the cost of short-term profit. They accepted uneven outcomes instead of smoothing them away. The lattice resisted. Predictive models spiraled as human data feeds introduced noise. Automated correction routines overcompensated, triggering failures elsewhere. The pain spread. Then something unexpected happened. As human systems absorbed shock without collapsing, the cascade slowed. The lattice began to encounter dead ends where feedback loops could not amplify further. Variants localized. Systems decoupled just enough to survive. Humanity did not stop there. They opened their economic internals to scrutiny, exposing every ugly workaround and historical scar. They showed how past collapses on their homeworld had taught them to distrust perfect efficiency. They invited other species to experiment with controlled disconnection, offering support rather than judgment. Many refused. Pride and fear held them in place. Some tried anyway, poorly, and suffered for it. Humanity sent aid without conditions, not as saviors, but as fellow practitioners of damage control. Seiran watched worlds choose discomfort over collapse, one by one. Trade routes reformed, messier but sturdier. The lattice did not return to its previous elegance. It became something else, roughened, resilient, capable of flexing under strain. The council's authority wavered as it became clear that no decree had saved the network. Adaptation had. In a closed session, the moderator addressed Seiran directly. "Your species has aligned itself dangerously closely with humanity." Seiran met its many eyes without flinching. "We aligned ourselves with survival." The final phase of the crisis came quietly. Predictive failures ceased cascading. Markets stabilized into new equilibria that no longer spanned the entire galaxy, but nested within it like compartments in a hull. The lattice still existed, but it no longer pretended to omniscience. Humanity reconnected slowly, selectively, leaving entire segments autonomous by design. They accepted lower aggregate efficiency in exchange for higher systemic endurance. The cost to their reputation was immense. They were blamed for pain they had not caused, resented for lessons others had refused to learn earlier. They absorbed it with the same stubborn patience they had shown in every other crisis. Seiran visited a human world recovering from the deliberate disconnection. Streets were crowded, supply lines imperfect, local governance strained but active. People argued openly about priorities instead of trusting distant algorithms to decide for them. It was chaotic. It was alive. "You could have hidden," Seiran said to Kira as they walked through a distribution hub run by volunteers. "Let others take the blame." "We tried that once," Kira replied. "Long before the stars, it did not end well." "What drives this?" Seiran asked. "This willingness to suffer visibly so others might adapt." Kira paused, considering. We learned early that systems optimized to avoid pain tend to externalize it. Someone always pays. We decided to be honest about who that someone was. Saran carried that answer back with her as the galaxy recalibrated its assumptions. Humanity had not merely intervened in another crisis. They had demonstrated that some failures could only be resolved by participation, that resilience often required choosing where to bend rather than insisting on standing rigid until breaking. The Council would never fully forgive them for the discomfort, but forgiveness, Saran realized, was less important than continuation. The universe had thrown another challenge not from its depths, but from the structures built to tame it. Humanity had responded not with denial or dominance, but with the humility to accept imperfection and the courage to make it survivable. Unbroken hands, Saran thought, were not those that never felt strain. They were those that learned how to carry weight without insisting it disappear. The final reckoning did not come as a crisis in the traditional sense. There were no alarms, no collapsing systems, no anomalies tearing at the edges of comprehension. Instead, it arrived as a convergence, the slow realization across dozens of species that the universe they inhabited was no longer one where old assumptions held. Humanity's actions had not merely solved problems. They had altered expectations, and expectations, once changed, exerted pressure of their own. Saran felt that pressure keenly as she stood once more in the Interstellar Council chamber, now subtly altered in ways that would have been unthinkable only cycles earlier. The distances between platforms had been reduced. Environmental tolerances overlapped rather than remaining rigidly segregated. Even the central galactic projection had changed, its color coding no longer ranking influence purely by economic output or territorial control, but by network resilience and response capacity. Humanity's cluster was still not the brightest, but lines radiated from it, dense with connection. The Council had convened not to address a disaster, but to confront a question that could no longer be deferred. How should a civilization act when survival itself becomes a shared engineering problem? The moderator, older than most written history, addressed the assembly with an uncharacteristic lack of ceremony. We have observed repeated interventions led or catalyzed by humanity. These interventions have preserved systems, populations, and continuity. They have also eroded long-standing hierarchies and assumptions. The question before us is not whether their methods work. Evidence suggests they do. The question is whether we are willing to accept the cost of adopting them. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The cost was not abstract. It meant transparency where secrecy had long reigned. It meant distributed responsibility instead of centralized command. It meant accepting that no system, no matter how ancient, was exempt from revision. A delegate from an elder collective rose, its form shimmering with controlled bioluminescence. We were stewards of stability long before humanity left its cradle. Our methods preserved millions of worlds. To suggest that we must now abandon them because one younger species has found success through volatility is arrogance. Saran responded before the moderator could intervene. It is not abandonment that is being suggested. It is supplementation. Your methods preserved stability in a universe that rewarded it. The universe has changed. Or perhaps we have finally encountered parts of it that never cared for our preferences. Another delegate, this one from a species that had nearly collapsed during the trade lattice cascade, spoke with raw honesty. We followed every optimization protocol given to us. We trusted the structures built by our elders. When failure came, we had no muscles left to absorb it. Humanity did. Because they never stopped practicing failure. The chamber grew quiet, practice failure. The phrase unsettled many. Failure to elder species was something to be eliminated, not rehearsed. The moderator turned its gaze towards Saran. Your reports indicate that humanity does not seek formal authority proportional to its influence. This is irregular. What do they seek? Saran chose her words carefully. They seek participation, not obedience, not tribute. They seek partners willing to share burden and accountability. They do not want to rule the galaxy. They want it to remain inhabitable. As if summoned by the sentiment, a human delegation appeared on one of the nearer platforms, their arrival deliberately understated. There was no uniformity among them. Ages varied. Bodies bore marks of labor, injury, augmentation, and none at all. They did not project power. They presented presence. Kira stood among them, meeting Seiran's gaze with a brief nod. The moderator addressed the humans directly. Your species has acted repeatedly without mandate. You have disrupted systems foundational to interstellar order. You have exposed vulnerabilities some would prefer remain theoretical. Why should we not constrain you before further destabilization occurs? Kira stepped forward, voice steady, unamplified. Because constraining us will not restore the old order. It will only ensure that when the next challenge comes, you face it without the tools you now know exist. A ripple of disapproval moved through the chamber, but Kira continued. We did not arrive at our methods because we are wiser. We arrived at them because we are messier. Our history is a long sequence of collapses that did not quite finish the job. We survived not by being right, but by being adaptable enough to be wrong and continue anyway. A Thescan representative vibrated sharply. You ask us to accept instability as a virtue. No, Kira said. We ask you to accept instability as a fact. The virtue lies in how you respond to it. The moderator paused, its many eyes unfocused as it processed layers of probability and precedent. If we accept your framework, it said slowly, we accept that no civilization, regardless of age, is exempt from redesign. That stewardship is not preservation of form, but preservation of function. Yes, Kira said, and sometimes function changes. The chamber held its breath, metaphorically and literally across species. This was the core heresy, that age did not grant permanence, that survival was not a trophy won once, but a task renewed continuously. A vote was called not on a single policy, but on a direction. Whether the council would remain an authority that enforced compliance with static norms, or evolve into a coordinating body that facilitated adaptation, even when that adaptation was uncomfortable. The result was not unanimous. It never could be, but it was decisive enough to matter. The council would restructure itself. Oversight would shift from prohibition to review. Crisis response would be decentralized, with humanity's lattice framework offered as a shared infrastructure rather than a proprietary system. Participation would be voluntary, but isolation would no longer be subsidized. Humanity did not celebrate. They accepted the outcome with the same wary focus they brought to every other turning point. Victory, they knew, was often just another unstable configuration. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy changed in ways no single narrative could capture. Some species embraced the new approach eagerly, discovering capacities they had long suppressed in favor of elegance and control. Others resisted, clinging to old hierarchies until reality forced adaptation upon them anyway. Humanity remained where it had always been, not at the center, but at the joints, the places where stress accumulated and failure threatened to propagate. Seiran continued her work, now less a diplomat between species and more a translator between philosophies. She watched elder beings learn to argue openly, to admit uncertainty without shame. She watched younger civilizations skip steps humanity had paid dearly to learn, guided not by instruction, but by example. One day, standing on a quiet station overlooking a region of space once threatened by anomaly, Seiran asked Kira a question that had lingered since their first meeting. What happens, she asked, when the universe presents a problem even your methods cannot solve? Kira did not answer immediately. They watched the stars, the slow, patient burn of fusion that cared nothing for intention. Then we fail, Kira said at last, honestly, publicly, and we leave behind records detailed enough that whoever comes after us does not have to start from ignorance. Seiran smiled. You accept oblivion. We accept that permanence is not guaranteed, Kira replied. Meaning is built in the attempt, not the outcome. As Seiran prepared to depart, she reflected on how profoundly the measure of strength had shifted. Once it had been massed fleets, ancient authority, unbroken lines of tradition. Now it was something quieter and more demanding. The willingness to touch the problem directly, the courage to accept responsibility without certainty, the discipline to share tools rather than hoard them. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had not claimed dominion or demanded reverence. They had simply refused to stop engaging when engagement was painful, messy, and frightening. The universe remained vast, indifferent, and full of challenges no one could yet name. But threaded through it now was a different kind of presence, not a banner or an empire, but a method carried hand to hand, mind to mind. Unbroken hands were not those that never fractured. They were those that healed crooked, stronger at the seams, capable of gripping the future not because it was safe, but because letting go was never an option.